Okay. All right. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Change with Ted Williams. Remember, change starts with you. We are here this week for a really exciting conversation, an exciting just time. As you guys know, that we are in a very challenging time in our nation, and I have really been trying to be a source and facilitator for conversations that matter. And so tonight we're going to be talking about racism and injustice for real. We're going to be talking about it with a group of people that I think are very uniquely qualified to discuss this conversation. And like I said to you last week, those of you guys who were here last week, we oftentimes have conversations about racism in communities of color very heavily on these platforms. And I think we are used to kind of constantly being a force. You know, I get invited to speak on diversity all over the place, right? And in a lot of different places. But I think that this problem, this challenge that we have in America is a uniquely American problem that really impacts all of us, regardless of our ethnicity. And so for me, I really wanted to have a conversation today, particularly with people who don't necessarily experience racism in the same way that I experience in this country, and why it matters to them and what they have been living and doing to make America better, if you will, around these issues. So, but before we begin, as you guys always know, we are going to play a little trivia game, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. So if you guys can get ready, we're going to do the game called This Week in the News. And remember, I've got little giveaways to send you if you win. So I'll give you once again, I got a bunch of random books here that I've written laying around. Here's one of them about essays on religion and politics. I've got my book about the African-American community. We got some 1619 paraphernalia, some t-shirts, things like that. So only for the winner, folks, not for second place, third place. This is America. So here we go. I'm going to give everyone a second just to come in here. It looks like we are populating. Hi, everybody. Let me know you're out here. Send us something in the comments to let me know that you are here. And we are going to get started. Now, you can hop in. Now, I'd like for all of the guests to play as well, but you guys can keep your own score. So, and let's just be open and honest. This is on the honor system here. So, and most, you guys are all good folks. So I don't have to worry about that. Okay, so here we go. Let me know you're here. Just send us a like or a hello. Let us know who's watching, where you are. I'm looking for some comments just before we get started. I don't know if they got a bunch of students here. I know that they were fighting 2 weeks ago. Last week, I had some church battles. Hey, Lauren, how are you? All right, Lauren Franklin is here. I think Lauren actually almost won last week until the very last moment. Okay, all right. Wayne and Mary, is it Coke, is it? Maybe someone knows them? Coke? Okay, yes. Okay, wonderful. Okay, Sean, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. All right, let's go ahead and start. We got 10 questions. Keep your own score. First person to put the answer into the chat box on Facebook wins. Now, this is actually kind of challenging because I'm streaming on 2 different places. So I'm going to use, this is really going to be challenging. I didn't realize this. So I'm going to be watching. I'm going to actually have to look at both pages at the same time. Ooh, so that'll be cool. All right. So that'll be fine. We will work it out. So here we go. Question number one. President Donald Trump. Dun, dun, dun. I've said those words already. Here we go. Donald Trump held up what symbol that sparked national controversy this week? President Trump held up what symbol that sparked national controversy this week? Is it a shoe? No, I'm joking. I'm not going to give you any multiple choice. If you can't figure this one out, I can't help you out. Okay, it looks like I've got an answer in here quickly already. Now, listen, before everyone starts going off on me, because last week people get really upset about this game. I am reading the feed from my account. If I don't know where it's coming from, I'm streaming on multiple platforms. I'm just looking at what comes in first. So if your thing froze up and you say hey, listen, I can't help you out. So it looks like the person that got it first is Susan Wakefield Del Porto, and she says the Bible. Susan, you got 1 point, sister. Mary got it. Walter got it. Henry got it. But Shalala, hey Shalala, how are you? They got it, but it looks like Susan got it first. Susan, you have 1 point. Next question. Ella Jones achieved what milestone in Ferguson, Missouri this week? Ella Jones achieved what milestone in Ferguson, Missouri this week? I think Matt knows. Matt shaking his head like he's got this, right? Okay, we'll see how the guest did in a moment. So you guys, okay, yes. Now, she did. Okay, I'm going to give Lauren that. However, I want to know what makes her unique as a mayor. Very good. David Fowley got it. Now, okay, so the issue is that Miss Jones is the first African-American mayor of Ferguson, Missouri. And obviously, you know, Ferguson was the ground zero, if you will, for America's last big racial unrest around police brutality. And so I'm going to go ahead. Dave actually got the answer right. I want to give a point for Dave and a point for Lauren, because Lauren got it first. She put mayor, which is fine. So I'm going to give a point for Dave and Lauren. Hopefully this will not come down to Dave against Lauren, but we'll figure it out, okay? So she's the first African-American woman who has been the mayor of Ferguson. So we've got a point for Susan, a point for Dave, and a point for Lauren. Here we go. Next question. Jay-Z's Rock Nation took out a full newspaper ad this week quoting which civil rights leader? Jay-Z's Rock Nation took out a full newspaper ad this week quoting which civil rights leader? I guess people get very competitive about this game. So just, you know, I used to use a software called Kahoot where they could use their phones to do it. And then it was freezing. And when I tell you, my wife was calling me and friends were, they were frozen up. So I said, you know what, let's just, just try the simple way. Okay. So here we go. What do we have here? Waiting for some answers. Jay-Z quoted which? That Susan is getting it again. Susan, I don't know what's going on over there, but she's popping in faster than anybody. And Susan put MLK, and Susan has it correct. That is 2 points for Susan, 1 point for Dave, and 1 point for Lauren. Walter, you got it. Hey, Walter, how are you, buddy? I haven't seen you in a while. Walter got it. However, Walter, I apologize. Susan beat you to the punch. Okay, here we go. Question number 4. 4 out of 10. The largest amphitheater in the world reopened to tourists this week. Where is this amphitheater located? Now, I could give you multiple choice. I don't know if you need it. I'll give you a second. Let's see if you might need multiple choice. You guys got this? The amphitheater? Anybody know this? So don't answer it, but anybody think they know it? Okay. All right. Lauren put Orlando. I'm going to wait for some of the comments to come from the other ones to come on in. Lauren put Orlando. Remember, folks, we're giving away, we got 1619 paraphernalia, we got books, we got all kind of stuff. So there's a high stakes in this game here. Okay, Lauren has Orlando. And let's see here. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and give multiple choice on this one. Let's see, we'll get 1 second here to see what comes in. Anybody else put anything in there? I'm waiting. I'll just give it a second. No, Jarima. No. Jarima Gorham, the CEO of Burst into Books, which is a wonderful, wonderful nonprofit organization, put Stony Island. That is going to be incorrect, and that's actually going to get you disqualified from the game, Jarima. That was such a horrible answer. This comedian. Okay. All right. Let me give you guys multiple choice. The multiple choice is: was it the largest amphitheater in the world reopened to tourists this week? New social distancing measures, but they are reopened. Where is it located? Is it A, Texas, B, Italy, or C, Brazil? Texas, Italy, or Brazil? Hope you guys are keeping your own scores, guests. Okay. All right. Dave Fowley. Okay, let's see. Here we go. We got Lauren put Italy. Susan put Italy. Walter put Italy. But it looks like in my feed, that Dave Fowley hit it first. The answer is Italy, and Dave Fowley now has a point. That puts Dave in the lead. Dave has 2. Susan has 2. Actually, no, excuse me. Dave and Susan are tied for the lead, and Lauren is in second place. Here we go. All right, next question, number 5. Police officers were charged for shoving a 75-year-old demonstrator this week in which U.S. city? And it wasn't Chicago. Just, okay. We do a lot of bad stuff, but that one, we didn't do that one. Okay. All right. So here's the deal. It looks like we've got 3 people that have popped in answers. One of them is one of our guests, and I am not going to let our guest score and win, unfortunately, even though they are brilliant. So that is Maxie. She got it first, but I am not going to let her get that. So the first non-guest on the show to get that right is, oh, look at Henry. My Uncle Henry is on there. Hey, Uncle Henry, how are you? Lauren got it right. Henry got it right. Walter got it right. But Dave got it right first, so Dave gets a point for that. Now, if you want, once again, keep your own personal score, and you can feel great, put it on your refrigerator, say, hey, I got 9 out of 10 right, or I got all 10 right. But if you didn't get the answers first, sorry. Okay, here we go. Number 6. The president received criticism for going into an underground bunker during protests this week. He said, however, he was there to do what? And by the way, it looks like a lot of people got the last answer right. So good job, you guys. Cynthia and Lauren and Walter. Okay. And okay, Lauren got it right. Walter got it right. Mike Crenshaw has it correct. Uncle Henry has it correct. However, it looks like Dave finally put clean up Obama's mess. No, Dave, that is not correct. The answer is, I think Dave and Jerima are cracking jokes here. The answer is for inspection, and it looks like Walter got that one first. So Walter has a point. Congratulations, Walter. Now, I feel badly because Lauren is getting most of these right, but she's like literally number 2 every time. So, Lauren, I might have to send you a consolation prize because you are my cousin and a lawyer too, and I don't want to mess with you. So, okay, here we go. Number 7. Hundreds of employees at this social media company protested their executive director's decision to do nothing about the president's post. There was a big employee protest at this social media company because of their decision to allow the president to post without any consequences. Which company was that? All right, I got answers in already, folks. People are moving quickly. It looks like Lauren has that right. Dave has that right. Susan has it right, but Susan came through first on my Uncle Henry has it right, but Susan came through first on my feed. The correct answer is the platform that we're streaming on mostly here. Hopefully they won't cut us off talking about them, but the answer is Facebook. It is Facebook. Okay. All right. Number 8 out of 10. Here we go. Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia ordered a statue removed this week in Richmond, Virginia, the capital. The statue was of whom? A, Jefferson Davis, B, Thomas Jefferson, or C, Robert E. Lee? Jefferson Davis, Thomas Jefferson, or Robert E. Lee? They are coming in quickly, boy. Quick, look at these smart people. I love our smart audience here. Okay. Joyce Chapman has joined the party. What's going on, Joyce Chapman? It looks like all these folks got it right. Keep your points, folks. Get a point. Write it down. Joyce put Robert E. Lee. Lauren put Robert E. Lee. Mike put Robert E. Lee. Dave put Robert E. Lee. Walter put General Lee. And Walter actually, however, got it first. So Walter gets the point. Everybody else keep the point. And once again, if you pressure me enough, I might send you something anyway, okay? All right, so Walter got that point. 2 more questions to go, folks. Number 9. In addition to the world's largest measles outbreak and also the coronavirus, the Democratic Republic of Congo was faced with an outbreak this week of this disease as well. Was it SARS, Ebola, or the flu? Okay. Oh, come on, these guys are awesome. It looks like they've all gotten it right. Lauren's gotten it right. Susan's gotten it right. Uncle Henry's gotten it right. And Walter's gotten it right, too. It looks like Walter's came in first in my feed. I don't know, maybe Walter's internet is better than everybody else's. I'm not sure. But he's got it, so Walter gets another point. And that leaves us to the final question. We've got Susan with 2 points. We've got Dave with three points. We have Lauren with 1 point in terms of getting first. Actually, I'm sorry. Susan has additional points to that. We've got Walter with 3 points. So I don't know what that is. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. This is all over the place. 2, 3. We got Walter with 3. We got Susan with 1, 2, 3. We've got Dave with 1, 2, 3. Oh my goodness, folks. You know what? This is it. Whoever gets this one right, basically between Dave, Walter, Susan, and also Lauren, because if Lauren gets this one right, I'll give her 2 points for that one. Okay. Whoever gets the last one right, they are our winners today. Here we go, folks. The head, no multiple choice. This is very important. It's actually an easy question now. The head of this sports league apologized for ignoring previous protests against police brutality. Which sports league was that, folks? Okay. Joyce got it right. Susan got it right. Henry got it right. Lauren got it right. Mike got it right. Dave got it right. Walter got it right. Who came through first in my feed? Folks, looks like it all comes down to not talent here, but who has the best internet. For whatever reason, Walter's popping in faster. Maybe Walter just quick to the draw. He's got it. Even though you guys all hit it, Walter got it just a split second before you. Walter wins our game. Congratulations, Walter. I won't disclose Walter's connection with one of our panelists because I don't want you to think that I am being biased here. So, so Walter, hit me in the inbox me, and we will go ahead and work out getting you one of these things here. So, all right, folks, thank you so much for playing with us. We're so excited to have you here today. Once again, here is what we are doing. We're talking about race, but if you notice, and I hate to say this again and again, but I want you to notice the panel that we're having to discuss race is a panel of friends, colleagues of mine, people who have been thinking about these issues for a very long time. And yet they are not thinking about these issues from the perspective as I would think about them necessarily as an African American, but people who have been affected by this in a different way. And this is why we're going to have this conversation. So we are super excited to have it. We've got 6 panelists, and actually we have a musical guest at the end, which Miss Leslie Michele will be joining us after we get through our panel discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch our panel out because we're going to do 3 at a time. I like smaller panels. I think it's really, really good for us to connect and engage. So our first panel I'd like to introduce is going to be Diane Miller, Matt Tebby, and also Mac Zarowski. And Mac, I'm hoping we got good audio for you. Can you say something to me, Mac, again? Hello?
I switched out my headphones.
Okay, cool. All right, wonderful. I think we can hear you. Okay, wonderful. So, yeah, so I'm going to put everybody else into our proverbial green room, and we will see you guys in just a second. So, bye-bye, Dave, and bye-bye, Dr. Connie. Okay, we'll be back with them in literally about 20 minutes. So you're hanging out in the green room. If you can see them, they're coming back, folks. Also, we got Leslie Michele, who will be joining us as well. Let me introduce you to our 3 panelists, our first 3 panelists. and tell you a little about them, and then we're going to go ahead and start our conversation. So, Max Zarowski is a lifelong learner, social activist, and adjunct professor in the criminal science, philosophy, and political science department at Kennedy King College. Welcome, Professor Max Zarowski. Matt Tebbe is a pastor, an author, a coach, a communicator, and a consultant with Christian churches around the world. He holds a master's degree in divinity from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and he's worked as an adjunct professor at Trinity College. He has contributed to the recent book, What Pastors Wish Their Congregations Knew, and he is now co-founder of the Gravity Leadership and co-pastor at the Table Church in Indianapolis. Welcome, Pastor Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. Last but not least is Mrs. Diane Miller. Diane lives in Chicago's Logan Square neighborhood. Her family embraced Christian community development concepts over 20 years ago as an integrated way to live out their faith in a socioeconomically diverse community. She is the co-director for the Chicago local CCDA network. She's a student of Father Richard Rohr's Center for Action. And she also attempts to be a humane bridge builder, incorporating the heart, head, and body the heart, head, body circles of life to promote and live justice. Welcome to our wonderful panel. Thank you guys for joining us. Let's get real, folks. I want to talk about racism, and you guys are not African American. You guys are very obviously from a different persuasion. Why does this impact you? Why have you all been uniquely, all three of you, working in this space in some way, shape, or form in your lives? Why does racism harm the white community?
I'll go.
Sure.
Racism harms the white community due to negligence on our leaders' part to teach us more about racism as a disease of America. I believe that I had spoken with you earlier this week. White people don't know about Tulsa disaster. They don't know about Rosewood. They don't know about other issues that they didn't know that lynching was still not a crime in America. Mm-hmm. Our history books are completely different than what they should be. Like History Month is for 28 days, right? 28 days out of the year. All our history books are filled with white men, white leaders, white this, white that. So racism hurts our community first because we're ignorant of it. We don't know about it. And if you don't teach the next generation through not just books, but now we have YouTube, now we have social media. There's such a large learning platform nowadays, right? That it's changing the second and third generations in a family. And now the older generations are looking at the younger generations like, oh, really? Is that how it happened?
Matt, Diane, why is this issue important to you? Why does it matter?
Well, it matters to me because I'm a Christian, and my call is to love other people as God loves me, and discovering racism. I grew up in a fairly racist environment, and I was one of the white kids that knew it was wrong to say the N-word, like even back in the 80s. And so that gave me sort of this pat myself on the back. I'm this enlightened sort of, I'm not racist because these guys, are racist. And the slow unpacking and unraveling of my own racism and seeing the destruction the damage that did in relationships, the way that I carried myself in the world and the privilege, the way I centered myself in different situations, the way that I, as a white man, would not only privilege myself by my gender, but also by my race. Just waking up to this, I realized I was just doing damage. I was creating barriers and obstacles to people. I was hurting people unintentionally, usually, although intentionally as well, and I didn't realize it. And so for me, it's about learning how to own my complicity in a game that has been running for 400 years, that is baked and cooked for me to win, and and dismantling and unpacking that I don't want to win that game anymore. And that game hurts people. And the whole construct of race, the way that it functions in America, is destructive and demonic. So that's why it matters to me.
Matt, I'd like to come back to you to hear a little more about your personal conversion, if you will, or your thoughts about that, particularly in the 80s, because, I grew up in the 80s as well. And, I grew up in in the south suburbs of Chicago at the time, a very diverse community. I didn't realize until I was an adult that I was living through white flight in the south suburbs. So when we moved there in the south suburbs, Calumet City area in 82, my community was 30% Latino, 30% white, 30% African-American. By the time we left, right before the 90s, it had become 70% African-American, just in that one decade. And so in the 80s, I had this false sense that we had overcome. As a kid, watching TV, living in a diverse community, realizing later that I was watching the transformation there. And so I'd love to come back to you and hear in a moment about your personal experience in that and how you did that. But I want to come to Diane for a second, because Diane, we talked about racial construction. I've talked to you a lot, Diane, and you use this phrase, which I love. Last time I had you on a panel, people kept coming back to me. Well, who's that lady? She kept using the phrase, the so-called white race, the so-called white race, the so-called, what is that? And race has been socially constructed in this nation. And you've talked and written a lot about that. Can you tell us a little about that for us, Diane?
Well, one of the things I do is, if I know I'm talking about justice issues or people that are somewhat woke, so to speak, white people, I use the phrase the created white race, because it stops people in their tracks. People of color know the divide. People who are white do not. And it's not talked about enough in church. I'm on the same page as Matt. I grew up with a faith, but to me, my faith has always been a lifestyle. And as a holistic with a W person, I can't separate my life, my work, my faith. And so I have tried very hard to live an integrated life, because I, being the old one on the panel, grew up in the 60s. And I grew up in a homogenous white rural area that was extremely racist. And it was always a tension for me, even as a kid. And I was bored out of my mind growing up in dominant white culture, conforming to the dominating ways. It didn't seem right, number one, as a kid. And number two, it was pretty boring to me. So as a person who's very curious and a reader, and I'm on the table with Mac as far as history, I knew something was wrong. And I've come to know that our history books are whitewashed and they're made palatable predominantly for children. And unless you study African-American history, most people of the created white race do not know the horrific truth of our country.
So I apologize. I said the phrase incorrectly, the created white race. I like the fact that you say that, because as we know, in America, when people came here, they were Irish and they were Scottish and they were British, they were Italian. And then they come to America and there's this identity that is built around being white, right? People of color came to this country, and for years, people of African descent, there were laws across the nation, the one drop rule, Racial Integrity Act, those sorts of things that made it very clear that if someone was in any way, shape, or form partially African-American, 1/8, 1/10, 1/16, that they would be classified as Black and second-class citizens. So the idea of the created white race, I think, Diane, is such an important thing. Most scientists will tell you that human beings are literally about 98% the same in terms of our DNA. And our differences don't align with ethnicity, but they oftentimes align with geography and family history and that sort of thing. And so I love this idea, because I don't think we can get to talk about race until we begin to unpack some of the assumptions that exist around these issues.
Right,
Matt,
right.
Yes.
And a lot of that, I mean, most white people, and I think a lot of African American or Black brothers don't understand how it was created. I mean, I actually do a course with a brother on deconstructing the story of white because people don't know history.
Absolutely. So I want to talk more about history in a second, but Matt, I want to talk about your personal experience. I'm going to come back to you, and then Mac, I want you to talk about your work in the political space around these questions of race and why it matters. But Matt, why don't you tell us what changed for you, and how did you kind of go through that process? What was it for you?
Yeah, there's milestones, but maybe the sort of the growing up, I was aware that I wasn't a Nazi or a racist that used the N-word, and so I sort of gave myself a pat on the back for that. And then,
Matt, I'm sorry if I could stop you for 1 second, just for clarification. Yeah. But people around you, you grew up in a space even in the 80s where people around you were using this.
Oh
threat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, they would tell like racist jokes or racial jokes and laugh, and I was like offended by it. But then that was sort of I passed the joke test. I didn't laugh at the jokes, so I'm not racist. And I think then in my childhood and teenage years, like the Rodney King thing hit, was like kind of the first video of a police brutality against a Black person that I remember. And the conversation I remember around that time was, we're all the same. Let's be colorblind. And so then I kind of adopted this posture of being colorblind. And it wasn't until about 15 years ago, I went on something called a Sankofa journey. And I'm not sure if you've heard of this. It's through the Evangelical Covenant Church. And the Sankofa is an African bird, Ghana bird, that has its head turned backwards and its feet turns forward. And it's looking backwards to head forward is the idea. And you go through different civil rights places, Selma, Birmingham, Memphis, through the South, visiting these different places with a partner who's of a different race than you. So I went through this week-long trip with a Black brother and just having dialogue. And I realized that the goal here isn't being colorblind. Like the goal here is to realize that I have a privileged perspective that I never question whether it's right or wrong. And so I have this sort of rubric, and I want to call it racist rubric, Ted, that sees white as normal, the standard, good. And there's 10,000 assumptions baked into that from my culture that then I'm unconsciously sorting and filtering and judging people based upon that. And so I think the last 15 years has just been a slow realization that I don't have to be bigoted or prejudiced like I saw my friends were when I was growing up to be a racist. Like my frame.
I think people in the back need to hear that. Say it again.
I know.
Please.
I don't have to be a bigot to be a racist. And this is what white people don't understand. So if I could just talk to the white people in the room for a second. Like, we are racist just by our benefiting from and being complicit in a system that has been set up for us to have power over other people and to legitimize it based upon the color of the skin. And then in that system, that white supremacist system, we have implicit assumptions all over the place that are racist. And so my work then the last 15 years, Ted, has been to name those, like drag them out, because they're unconscious, right? Like I don't get confronted with them. On Friday, I was with a Black sister on this webinar, and she mentioned something from her perspective. This is Friday. I went, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that before. I had to say to myself and to her, I am still a racist. This is still being unpacked for me.
Man, I really appreciate your honesty. I'm seeing some of these comments, some of my friends and people that I know who are saying, thank you for that particular comment about not being a bigot and still to be a racist. It's interesting because as a person of color, we all grow up with a white standard in this society. So even though you say, hey, sort of the white standard, you kind of judge everything by that, we have the same standard. And I think it contributes to a lot of the destruction that you see in communities of color. I've had many, many debates with people about, well, we're talking about police brutality. What about black on black crime? What about that? And I'm suggesting that the issues that cause police brutality, that cause inner city violence are all one and the same, folks. We are dealing in a society that has suffered from white supremacy, suffered from injustice, suffered from the second-class citizenship, and it affects us all the way around. So they're not separate issues, they are the same. And so I appreciate you saying that. I would liken it to, and I don't know this, and I'm gonna come to you in 1 second, Matt, but I can't understand what it's like to be white in America. So I don't get it. But what I can understand is what it's like to be a male in America, and to begin thinking about, well, when people talk about the Me Too movement, and this stuff doesn't affect me, what is that? And to me, that's the only place. So I kind of understand what you're going through, because I know that if I am not active as a male in renouncing sexual harassment, renouncing, sexism, then I know that I am part of the problem. And I think for me, it's the way I understand it. Matt, go ahead. And actually, you guys hop in. I can shut up because y'all can hop in however you want to. But Matt, go ahead, talk to me.
I'll just say amen to that. There is, yes. and the trick for a white man is not to center themselves in that deconstruction.
Yes,
that's the trick. Because I roll out of bed in the morning thinking the world revolves around me. Right? I'm not having to code switch in any relationships. I'm not having to bow down to women to make sure that I'm not being too mean, but also not flirting. And I don't have to act white in this situation because I just am white. So so part of it is just, I mean, like, you know what I mean?
That is true.
But it's a tyranny. It's a hegemony. So white isn't even good for white people. It's not even good for us. Even though it gives us power and we feel superior and it gives us privilege, it's demonic. It's killing us. And it's killing our black brothers and sisters and other people of color. So I think I believe you, Ted, because I'm waking up too to how patriarchy and how being a man and how the way I carry myself in spaces with women, like I'm aware right now that I'm doing all the talking. So like, I just am aware that I have to wake up to that and be present to that.
So we'll both shut up. Go ahead, guys, ladies.
Yeah.
Well, I
wanted to jump in about some of the political.
Go ahead, Mac.
Oh, go ahead.
Well,
no, go ahead, because I think I jumped in and I think.
Oh. Okay. Well, I was just going to own something too. I just finished a book study on Layla Syed's Me and White Supremacy. And I thought, I've been doing this work for 20 years. Surely there's nothing more, that I have to unpack. But it's daily unpacking. And I've talked to a neurologist about this, because what you learn as a child goes into your brainstem. It's like you have lizard fight reactions and responses in your head. So I still, being over 60 now, when I see something, I'm like, wait, reframe that in your head. I kind of have to stop. And one of your questions was around institutional usage of all this. And honestly, church is one of the worst places. And I'm struggling
Amen.
With white church in general. Amen. Because they do not, like this constructive social justice, I don't even use that term. It's like, do not be using that term social justice with me. This is biblical justice. This is what Jesus came for, was justice for all people. And we make it out into something else. But my point being in all of this, I still had to deal with like the whole white savior complex that I learned in church. Yes. I'm like, man, that is still something in me.
I want to say something about that so badly, but I'm gonna shut up. Go ahead, Mac, because go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm really interested in what you have to say about that, Ted.
Well, no, I don't. I really don't want to be.
Because I did not realize that Jesus was not white until I was in my 20s. So you figure I didn't know Jesus wasn't white, because all the churches I went to, he was blonde, blue-eyed, like the Italian had painted him 300 years ago. That's what Jesus was to me.
You guys, this is heartbreaking to me, honestly. It really, really is, because I didn't realize how bad it was.
It's bad. It's bad.
I mean, I knew it was bad, but to hear, like, to peel back the layer and say, yeah, back in the 80s, this is what we were doing. And, here I am, educated person, didn't realize he wasn't white until 20s. But honestly, as a black person, I probably didn't realize that either until that age. And the idea that Jesus was a Middle Eastern man living in sort of a palace, living in, I can't. How on earth is he blonde hair and blue eyed? And yet, to your point, these things have been sort of pushed on all of us. We've all been indoctrinated with these principles, and they are damaging. And what I appreciate the most about this conversation, because I'm going to be very frank with you, growing up, I went to high school. My high school was almost 1,000 people. There were less than 20 black people in the whole high school. Okay. Now, I'm the kind of person, I am gregarious, outgoing. I was elected class president twice in that environment, right? On the football team, blah, blah, blah. Most of my white friends in that environment, I have been, and I'm not saying this is not, because many of them who I've connected with now, I can start to see many people start to think, which I'm very proud of. I'm very excited for many of them and the connection. But for most of the white people I've dealt with over my life, I can't have this conversation as honestly, because I think people get offended. And they go, well, you're saying I'm racist, and you're saying, and I've had my own hard struggles, and nobody gave me anything, and so why can't you just pick up? And what you guys are talking about is so much deeper than that, so much deeper than just this sort of individual, I'm not a racist or whatever. The entire system is structured, and it's so much more powerful coming from you than it is coming from me.
Yeah, and one of the other things I'll say with that, I mean, because if you read Robin DeAngelis's book, White Fragility, especially chapter 13, The White Woman Tears, I mean, white women in particular, like, we're supposed to be nice. We're not supposed to talk about this stuff. And one of the things I really love is conversations with my African-American girlfriends, because, like, they're authentic. Like, we don't get authentic about this stuff in church. And believe me, I've been called out enough, and I'm like, I get my little fragility hurt, but I'm like, they made me better people. And I love their authenticity, because we don't have enough authenticity in white church around all of this.
Matt, come on.
I agree with that.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead if you have anything to say.
No, I'm just saying I agree with that, because the women's fragility, you just don't... white women are held to a completely different standard. We're held to this pedestal standard where we are supposed to be perfect all the time, and we're supposed to teach our children what the men want the children to learn, and we're supposed to socially construct them as the men want them to be socially constructed. And the rise in single mothers in white families has been able to change this generation of kids. This generation of kids, like my son, who's 16, right? He thinks completely differently than he would have had I been in a quote unquote nuclear white family. I have been able to expose him to so many other things because I haven't had that patriarchal leader. I'm not saying all white men are like this neither. I'm just saying I believe that he has had a much better chance. My son can sit down and talk to you about sexuality, racism, anything so openly that sometimes I look at him like, are you reading the books that I bring home? Because like, how do you learn all this? But again, going back to social media, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Google University. We are so lucky to have such an educated new generation.
Yeah, that's good, Mac. I'm just thinking that it's been about 2 years, Ted. That 2 years ago, I made the decision that I was going to prioritize being an ally for Black people over being nice to white people. So I spent a lot of time trying not to offend white people with the suggestion that they may be racist. There's one of the worst sins in the white community is that you would call somebody racist. This is like the unspoken thing. You can almost do anything. Nice. No, it's not nice. I mean, it's worse to accuse somebody of being racist than it is to actually be racist. Mm-hmm. That's the hegemony of white supremacy. And so I just decided 2 years ago, like, I'm done. Like, the thing I have as a white person that I think is of value is like my body. And because white culture actually values a white body. Like, it has value. And so
so does our entire culture, and in a very specific way.
Right. So why not? Yeah. So why not try to use it in a way that helps other people? So I guess for me, I'm trying to name for, I lead a church. We have black brothers and sisters, but we're predominantly white. I'm just trying to name for them. Hey, if you take the Bible seriously and you think Jesus is risen from the dead, our tradition in America runs right through slaveholders. People who could sign our doctrinal statement owned other people. We have to reckon with that. We actually have never, the white church has never decolonized the slaveholder religion they've inherited, ever.
Right.
We haven't even started to have that conversation. And so for me, I said at the beginning, Ted, that I care about this because I love Jesus, but I feel like I have a conviction of something that needs to happen that I've never done before, that I haven't seen happen before, and I don't know how to do it. But I'm confident that unless we decolonize our slaveholder, what we've inherited from slaveholders, that we will unintentionally, good, pious, well-intentioned, good-meaning people will continue to perpetuate racist attitudes and ideas and thoughts in the name of Jesus.
Yes.
And so I want my life just to be about naming that for white people.
Yes.
Like, let's not on our watch. Not anymore on our watch.
Ted, another book that I'd like to recommend for people is My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. He's a trauma therapist out of Minneapolis. And it's a great book because one of the things I really love that he does in this book is that he talks about people in the created white race's trauma. Like, this started in the Middle Ages with white people. We are violent as humans. And he talks about the baggage, all of our heritage baggage that people from this created white race, the different tribes, brought with them to the U.S. and how that's manifested. Now, that's played out in a lot of the ways that Matt talks about. And in what I teach around deconstruction, it's all based around economics. And now we have a knowledge-based economy tied to it. So if you are pedigreed, Matt, you've got a double whammy. You're pedigreed, a pastor, and, well, it's kind of a trifecta, and you're white. So you've got it all with what the world and this country values as far as dominance, because dominance is what is the prevailing dominant view is what's valued.
So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'll let everybody have the last word, but I'm going to have to close this part out because we've got more panelists coming and something else. I am so grateful for this. I realize we have to have a part 2. And so I want to informally invite you all back. We cannot finish all of this right now, but this is the beginning. We have to have these conversations. I know that my audience, that myself, that we are being richly blessed by this, but this is the beginning. And how do we teach other people, and how do we connect in these ways and begin to unpack these things? Someone asked in the comment section, how do you teach a white person to reconcile with slavery when they say that they physically had nothing to do with it? That is one of the major questions. And I know many people, you guys are probably very experienced with that argument. Hey, it wasn't me. I didn't, that kind of thing. And so I don't know if we can answer that, but I'd like for each one of you, I was going to give you just literally 30, 60 seconds here. What can we do? Mac, you can start.
So one of the things that we need to do is redefine critical infrastructure in communities. They cannot be tax-based anymore. Areas like Inglewood, as manufacturing and as population density decreased, so did the taxes, so did the money for the community centers and for the churches and for childcare centers. That has to be redefined to try to ensure some type of equity and equality of resources. Those are human capability resources. They're not amenities.
Diane?
Well, I like the whole head, heart, and body engagement. So you have to read. You have to read African American history, White Fragility, My Grandmother's Hands. Those are some great starts. But then you have to have conversation with other white people. You have to engage people with this because it's the connection. Either engage, do a book study, watch a movie together, because that's visual and our culture is very visual. And then the third thing is like, get yourself some friends that are not just exactly like you, because this is socioeconomic too. I mean, it's not just, there's a tie. This is layered.
Absolutely. Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, for me, it's a few things. I just own that I'm a racist. Publicly, as a priest, as a pastor, as a leader. And I tell white people, the best thing that can happen to you today is that someone would lovingly show you that you're wrong. Repentance is good news. You have nothing to lose except for what you'd want to lose anyway, right? If I call you a racist and it's not true, so what? If I call you racist and it is true, today's the day of salvation, brother. Like, just reckon with it. So that's the first thing. Just inviting people, rather than scapegoating people, just inviting people onto the ground that I'm trying to inhabit, which is, I got to learn, I got to listen. Second thing is, and I'm trying to do this on social media, I'm just trying to throw out how whiteness works. White people don't know how whiteness works. And so, today I just asked, what about white on white violence? And white people, can you imagine that no one would let you talk about, say, violence on the unborn unless you gave a reckoning and accounting for white on white violence? And they wouldn't even listen to you. Like, that's how whiteness works. Because nobody ever blames a white person for the sin of all white people. Right? We get to reckon with our own sins individually. And so if I'm a jerk, Diane's not to blame. But that's not the same in whiteness. If Ted's a jerk, all black people are jerks. That's how whiteness works. So just trying to hold that before white people enough so that they can be like, I wonder why that is. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Or Ted has to prove that he's not a jerk, and then Ted gets put in a category that's separate, right?
He's the exceptional special Negro, as Ibram Kendi says, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, once again, comes back. You guys, man, this is fantastic. We got to do part 2. I see people in the comments like, yes, let's do part 2. So I'll be back at you guys. I got to get other folks in here. Thanks. God bless you all. Thank you for at least beginning to have these conversations and helping people to think differently. And I think if we think differently, we can act differently. I will be in touch. God bless you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we are running a little bit behind here because the conversation was just so good. And I just could not stop myself. So please forgive me. But I got to introduce our next panelist. And we also have Michele, who's an awesome vocalist in here, who's going to come at the very end and kind of bless us with some creativity and that sort of thing. So let me introduce our next panelist. And guys, we're just going to hop right into this because we've been having a very good, rich conversation. Dave Larson. Dave Larson earned his PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies from Loyola University in Chicago. He is the founder of the Bright Promise Fund for Urban Christian Education in Chicago. This is, everyone, Dr. Dave Larson. Clive Cragen was born in South Africa, attended high school in Europe, considers Chicago his home. He's got a history degree, history and Bible degree from Grace College, MA in Inner City Studies from Northeastern. Clive is also now has taught urban ministry at Moody Bible Institute. And he is, if I'm not mistaken, you were the diversity director there at one point also, Clive, is that correct?
I was on the president's diversity panel. I was the faculty rep.
Okay, wonderful. And he currently lives in the Austin neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. Last but not least, Connie Mixon. Connie Mixon is a professor of political science at Elmhurst College. She spent many years in the city colleges of Chicago. She's a founding member of the 1 Million Degrees organization that gives scholarships to students. She is a writer. She is a political commentator for many different national and international media outlets. Welcome, you three. Thank you all for having this. My last conversation, I was trying to go political. We got personal. I've got a plethora of questions to ask you all, but I kind of just want to shut up and let you talk. We were talking about institutional racism. We've been talking about individual responsibility for that. Why is this issue important to you all in the work that you do? And I'm willing to start with whoever, but we're in a really, really challenging time in this country. I want you all to speak as to why this impacts you, even though you are not of color.
I'll jump in, Ted. For me, this has always been the most important element is learning your own story and listening to the stories of others. To learn what this topic of racism that you've called us to tonight always begins for me. If we're to love God and love our neighbor, we need to know our neighbor's story, and they need to know ours. And that involves some very careful listening. So my story is sort of bookended by growing up as a high school student in Englewood during the period of white flight and great fear among a lot of people that got reflected and shaped into institutions like churches and schools and community organizations developed for fending off Black people from moving further into Englewood. Mm-hmm. Sort of bookended when I became a grandfather to 3 grandsons who are biracial and identify as Black, and seeing all of what's going on today and throughout the history through their lenses now. And in between, there are markers and milestones of how the issue of racism, the disease of racism, I either observed, heard about, or became a part of, unfortunately. But the way to get at it, I think, and I appreciate everything the previous panel was talking about, but I think if we don't listen to each other and we're not free to tell our own stories in a great deal of honesty, we're not going to get very far.
Please,
Connie.
I've lived in Chicago my whole entire life. I went to Chicago public schools. And as many of us know, Chicago was pretty late in following the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education. And Chicago did not integrate their schools until the 1970s. And I was in grammar school in the 1970s at an all-white grammar school. And busing started. And I think what was so shocking to me at that time was the fact that my friends' parents were actually standing out in front of the school, holding up signs, using the N-word, calling for these students seeking a better education to go back where they came from. Ted knows a little bit about my mother. I'm the daughter of a pretty radical left United Methodist pastor. And my mom was very involved in the civil rights movement. And I think I'm grateful for the mother that I had, who was able to teach me and explain what was happening in a world that I didn't understand as a child. And I think we all have our calling. My mother's was ministry. Mine is teaching. I am the director of urban studies. I teach about urban issues. Embedded in all of that is the issue of racism. And I fully believe until we as a nation reckon with racism, that we are never going to be whole. And one of the best things I can do is to teach about structural, institutional, systematic racism that continues to persist, that we see every day in our segregated world just here in Chicago.
Wow, you said a mouthful, and I forgot that you guys were listening, so you guys know exactly what we're talking about. But I love, and I'm going to come to you, Clive, in one second, but what I want to do, what I hope to do, why I think you all are so critical to this is because most people never take the time to unpack why. We are an anti-intellectual society, and we want very simple and quick answers. And without taking the time to do the kind of work that you do, Connie, to hear the kinds of things that you're talking about why Chicago looks the way it does and some cities like that, people are left with conclusions, assumptions, one of two assumptions. Either there is institutional racism or these people are like this and they want this and they act like this. And if you have not, and to me, I have never been more convinced in my life that the truth of Dr. King's quote that we all have a moral obligation to be educated, that ignorance is dangerous. And when I've watched videos of people who have sort of, even this week, been against protesters and that sort of thing, the consistent theme I see, I used to think, by the way, and I hate to say this for all of the Christian communities here listening and watching, I used to think the X factor was religion or Christ or redemption. And for me, on this issue, it's not. Now, I'm a firm believer and do ministry and all those kind of things, so I'm not negating that. But that's not the X factor on this. Education is the X factor on this issue. Because unfortunately, many people of faith have gotten these notions of white supremacy, even in their theology, and it's never changed. But I believe the work that you're doing, Connie, in educating and unpacking and telling those stories is more important now than ever. So, Clive.
It's both personally and professionally important. Personally, obviously, I was born in South Africa, so as a white South African, by some definitions, I'm bad. But it was I grew up at least in a place where I clearly understood I was white and I had power, and I think that was a gift in kind of a roundabout sort of way. But I grew up in a home where my parents, I never heard them ever refer to people in any kind of derogatory way. In fact, my grandfather left the country when they made apartheid the law and took his family back to England because he didn't want to raise his family there. It's professional as well because it's personal also because I have a father of 4 kids. 2 are African American and 2 are Caucasian, and so as they grew older, from being cute little kids, I began to see what they were dealing with in life. And it was about the same time when they were young, I started teaching at Moody, and I realized that I could not look them in the face. I could not be honest if I did not become a voice for seeing it become a place where they could walk into it and they would not be outnumbered, a place that would welcome them and value them and their perspective. And we've lived 30 years in Humboldt Park and Chatham and on the West Side. And I have just become more and more convinced that it is an important issue because of what it has done to our country and how it has caused people to believe so many lies about themselves and about the world that they live in. And it is important, I think, for white people to speak up on this because most white people don't even know they're white. They don't, but if you talk about it, they get really pissed at you for saying that they're white. And it was my job. I was trying to upend people's idea of identity so that they would begin to, first, I am white, and second, and what am I going to do with that? And what has been done with that?
Clive, can you unpack that a little bit? Most white people, your statement was, don't know that they're white. What does that mean?
Well, white people generally see everything through the individual lens. So they see themselves as me. But because white has become the norm, we tend to see everything else as other. But because we're placed in the center, we tend to see ourselves as the kind of the norm, the norming element. And we tend to not even acknowledge that we're now, obviously, white is a social contract, but I actually think white people have lost something in the social construction of whiteness that they bought into. Sometimes they've lost some of their own ethnic identity, that it's kind of been lost, which is why sometimes I think there's hostility towards black tables or black groups of people that gather around because it's something I've lost something, but I don't want you to have it either.
That's an interesting American phenomenon that people, sort of this whole assimilation ideology that people lose their ethnic identity because I've lost mine, you should lose yours too. And that is not necessarily how many Americans see us in our multicultural environment. Dr. King said that, and I'm misquoting him horribly, but he said essentially that racism impacts white people morally heavily as well. And they are the victims of a racist society just as much as African Americans or other groups are as well, because of what it does to them internally, which I've never thought about, but I think is a very real issue. Dave, I want to come to you because you and I have spent much time together. We had a long road trip to a meeting one time, and we were talking about your Inglewood journey. I teach in Inglewood. I work in Inglewood. We just did a community cleanup in Inglewood. I'm always sort of thinking about that space. Many people do not understand what happened to Inglewood just 30, 40 years ago, and you lived it. Can you tell us a little about it as a model, if you will, or case study in white flight and sort of divestment in communities and that sort of thing?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but let me say that on a personal level, I was actually beat up and taken in a squad car driven by an uncle who was a Chicago cop and asked to pick up anybody. Just pick someone and we'll make sure that they stand for it. So I got to think, why is that happening? By the grace of God, I was able to say, I'm not going to do it, Uncle Mike. But it began to stir up in me, why are we going through all these discussions at church about moving? Why are we so shook about for sale signs on lawns? What happened to the front porch as the communal space? Why is there so much fear in and among the people I'm going to school with, going to church with? And so that was something that just kept going. Looking back on it, doing some research, finding church records that said, we hear that there's going to be a major influx of Black people coming to our church on a certain Sunday. What are we going to do about that? And if you can imagine this, and I think you can, because I think we've talked about it, they actually passed a motion that they would be ushered to the back rows and then afterwards down to the basement to determine their motivation for attending church. So all of those kinds of personal stories lead to, well, how do policies and principles and grow out of those kinds of lived experiences and the stories that we've heard on both sides of any kind of issue? How do we learn what that meant for people moving when the Dan Ryan went in and destroyed homes? And they were looking for housing and they ran into redlining and all of those kinds of issues that are part of the fabric of institutional racism, personal racism. All of those things are related to individual stories. And unless we unpack some of that personal history and begin to listen more carefully and then reflect on our own journey and the markers along the way, I'm not sure we're going to make a lot of progress together. And that's what it's about, together. So yeah, Englewood was a shaping influence. I had the privilege of riding back into Englewood with a fellow church member, African-American pastor, who lived 6 blocks away at the very same time I was living in Englewood. He was nearby, 6 blocks away. We spent a day traveling through the neighborhoods and telling our stories. And then you begin to talk about what could have been different. How should churches have acted in that time? Was it even possible in those days? So that's sort of my Englewood chapter in my life story.
You know,
Go ahead.
Dave mentioned redlining, and I think that's important for us to understand if we're going to talk about structural institutional racism, is that redlining was a function of our national government done through the Homeowners Loan Corporation, that the only criteria that was used to determine whether the federal government would insure mortgages was race. And if they looked at a particular area, urban area, and there was the presence of African Americans, a whole entire neighborhood would get redlined. And that meant that there was no economic development that would happen. Whites that lived in those areas were able to leave because they could move to the newly developed suburbs that didn't and wouldn't be affected by restrictive covenants that prevented African Americans from moving into those areas. and they could build generational wealth. Whereas those that were contained in Inglewood, we could put a map, a redlining map over the city of Chicago today and still see the same patterns of inequality, discrimination, and lack of economic investment in those same areas today. And an Urban Institute report just came out last week that found that in Chicago, private market capital is 9 times more likely to go to existing white affluent areas in the city of Chicago. It is the new redlining.
Mm-hmm. You see the same thing in the non-for-profit world. If you look at organizations and who they're founded by, historically white founded organizations receive much more of the money than any organizations of color. In fact, there are organizations that will have white people kind of be the front talking because they know they will get considered less. I think it's almost done without even. It just is done. Still.
Yeah.
So, it's what I am really interested in, particularly around these issues of economics, right? I have many conversations with people, many of all different ethnicities, who as Americans connect our social outcomes with the sort of amalgamation of individual behaviors. If people acted this way, then they would have this, and this is why this community, et cetera. But literally, how do you overcome not just historic redlining, but current redlining that is, to your point, happening today? I mean, I ran for office a couple of years ago, and we were doing a lot of work around the TIF issue in the city of Chicago. And one of the things that I saw during the campaign was that TIF dollars under our previous mayor, Mayor Emanuel, were moved to build and develop areas in the South Loop. And so we have a new basketball arena in the South Loop and new hotels. And those TIF dollars, as I understood them, were supposed to go to blighted communities, were supposed to spread economic development out, and they did not. And so what they did was they sort of just reinforced the inequality that already existed in the city. So I just want to know, Connie, from you particularly, being sort of steeped in this public policy work, what can we do? And is there any hope? Is there anything being done right now that is countering that? Or ought we to begin creating this? Because I have to believe that someone, somewhere, has said, wait a second, 9 times the private equity investment? We got to do something about it. Give me some hope, Connie, please.
Yeah, you're exactly right with TIFs, and they became a slush fund. Miller Coors got millions of dollars to put their headquarters on Wacker Avenue. Wacker Avenue was not distressed, right? So the whole point of TIFs is the but-for argument. But for this investment, there would not be other economic development. Lincoln Yards, right? Lincoln Yards, arguably the most valuable real estate in the city of Chicago, got billions in TIF money. So this is happening, but I go back as a political scientist to the fact that ultimately citizens have to care enough. Citizens have to be educated, and citizens have to demand more. And part of that's through voting, right? And so in terms of hope, I do believe there's change with Mayor Lori Lightfoot. She is I said this before, Ted, she is the first mayor in my lifetime to talk about economic development west of Ashland, south of Roosevelt, talking about economic development in the neighborhoods. Now, there's a lot politically to overcome to do that, which we all know, right? Because of power structures, because of racism. Think about the aldermen back in Richard J. Daley's time, right? The white aldermen that wouldn't let public housing come to their particular wards, right? So they have built their own little fiefdoms in many ways, right? So are they going to want to give that up? So Lori Lightfoot can't do it alone. Right? She's the first mayor that I've heard talking about doing these things, but citizens have to be educated, and they have to demand action from their elected officials to get those things done.
Clive, you're on the West Side, and
Yes, sir.
my goodness, the West Side historically was not rebuilt after the riots that happened in 1968, and we're seeing the same dynamic right now.
That's right.
And I'm terrified. I really am. I mean, I'm driving around the city today. We assume that a lot of the buildings that were torn down in the last week or so will be rebuilt and restored. But we know from where you live, that doesn't necessarily happen. Talk to me about what's going on in your community, what we ought to be doing, what we ought to be thinking about, particularly around this issue of larger inequality and race in America.
Wow. But I think part of what there's still areas that have not been redeveloped, or buildings that are standing unfixed up from 30 years ago. And so I think we're going to unfortunately see the same thing. Hopefully, I'm hopeful from the fact that there's so much of, hopefully we've hit an inflection point. Bryan Stevenson just talked about that there was enough of an outcry that at least there's focus on it right now. But I do think it comes down to what Connie was saying. The local officials, aldermen control development in their neighborhoods. They sign off on every building permit. They have so much power. And if you don't do what they want, you don't get your permit. So something has to be done about that stranglehold. And Ted, you even discovered it. You run against the system politically in Chicago. They don't play nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got some stories. I got a book coming out, Connie. I got to tell some crazy Chicago politics stories. So, yeah. But,
I'm hopeful, but I'm skeptical.
Yeah. Well, let's bring this home. And I want each one of you, I want to go around the room, and I want you to tell me where should we focus our efforts? How do we overcome this 400-year legacy of capitalist inequality coupled with white supremacy and racism that have really sort of come together for sort of a perfect storm of injustice in this country? And you'd have to be blind not to see it. You know, this is why the conversations with people who act like there's nothing there, I can't even imagine. I don't understand it. I mean, how can you drive through, a city like Chicago, a city like Detroit, a city like, Newark, New Jersey, and not see anywhere in this country the clear, in some ways, I hate to say it, sort of caste system that exists, right? The inequities that they're just so strong. And I think, for someone like me, and Connie knows this, for many, many years, as a person of color, I had to, in some ways, partially deny some of this stuff so that I could live and function and achieve and pursue. And I could not live in a space where, my goodness, I can't achieve anything. I have to say, okay, who cares about that? I've got to get over here. And that dichotomy exists in America too, by the way, because obviously there are places to excel and succeed in this country. Paul Robeson, the famous actor and singer and activist, said that his individual success, because he was very famous and wealthy for part of his life, did not negate the collective struggle of millions of other people in this country. And I think that what I realize in my own life is we are still steeped in this 400 years later. And without any acknowledgement, we can't go anywhere. And so I guess my concluding question for you all is, what do we do? Where do we focus? What is the obligation of people who don't look like me to change this dynamic? How can we make America not great again, but great for once?
Well, Ted, I'll hang my hat on education and the 15 schools that were part of the Right Promise Fund for Urban Christian Education. I think we're anchored in their communities, took them very seriously, wanted to contribute to it, but took education in the sense that it was a diverse student body, parent groups. They learned from each other, and they were with people who were other than they are all day long, taught by people who had priorities that reflect what we want this world to look like. So I'll hang my hat on education as the biggest mover here.
I love it. I love it. I hope you guys are listening and writing it down. And if you guys have comments or questions, please let me know in the comment section. But I'm writing this down, education, which I could not agree more. Connie?
I agree with that, Dave, education. But I also think it's important for those of us who are white to understand that it's not enough to post something on social media. It's not enough to tweet about it, right? It's not enough to put up a quote from Dr. King, or even to march in a protest one day and then go back to our regularly scheduled lives. This is something that we have to commit action to, right? So we have to challenge ourselves. We have to challenge those that we interact with, the organizations that we're part of. We have to ask whether or not these organizations reflect the diversity of the community they serve, of their employees. What is the culture? Is it inclusive? Does it really promote equity? Think about who we hire. Do we include everybody at the table in decision making? And this is something we can do on an individual basis, just in our daily lives. But we have to be aware of the larger issue to be able to ask those questions of ourselves and those we interact with.
You know, I love what you mentioned about the idea that it is both individual and collective.
Right.
I think sometimes people get overwhelmed and say, well, what can I do? Yeah. But we can make individual decisions to be intentional about these issues that would change our sphere of influence and then potentially change other areas from there. So I thank you for that. Clive?
I guess I would summarize it with one word, 2 words: interrogate whiteness. Because I think a lot of the systemic inequalities in that are symptomatic of the white supremacy, whiteness construct that's been built. I think, so from my experience, whatever institutions we're a part of, whether they're schools or churches or businesses, we have to do the research in our own organizations and unearth what was done or not done, confront it, own it, and decide what to do about it. So, for example, at Moody, one of the things that we discovered was that in the early 1900s, Moody signed off, along with the Archdiocese and a number of others downtown, on some restrictive covenants that would limit people. And at that point, African-American students were said, you can study here, but you can't stay on campus anymore. Well, I think actually Moody Bible Institute and I don't think they're that unique, should come out and say, this is what happened. This is what we signed on. This was wrong. And as a result of that, we're going to do X. Because it's not, I'm tired of people just wanting to have conversations and dialogue and talk about it. I've been in Chicago since the 90s, and every Christian organization I've been a part of has talked about it. Their boards still look the same. Their curriculum still look the same. They still are. So it's time, I think, that we interrogate whiteness and unearth what we've done. Even look at, what does our funding come from? And to challenge that from the get-go, and then to take steps for restitution. So, for example, a place like Moody should say, if you had a grandparent who went to Moody during those times, we want to honor you by inviting you to come at cost to us to study, because we want to make it right. Because I don't think there's any kind of there's right made unless there's restitution. You can identify wrong and you can say it's bad, and everybody's got a statement out now. I don't want to read another statement, because every organization's got statements, but statements don't mean anything until you actually look at the hiring practices. When was the last African American or person of color that you hired? Why not? What kind of biases operate in your own organization? Look in what I ought to do, look in your library. Look at the books you read. Are they all the same author? Look at your social media networks. And I think organizations and individuals have to ask that question. We have to start looking in the mirror and owning the crap we are part of.
Brother, skin in the game. You are so right. I was thinking, I don't know if you guys have been thinking about this. I've been thinking about the NFL statement this week.
What a joke.
And I've just been so frustrated and so angered because after all of the years that you had to figure out that this peaceful protester was saying something, you did not. And now all of a sudden that the public mood has changed, you come out and you say this. But if there's no skin in the game, if there is no action, if there's no action that actually costs, because that's really the issue. You know, when you look at sort of a model of cost, I think about the abolitionist John Brown, who kind of gave everything for this cause. I mean, he is the quintessential example of what it means to give up privilege and to lay down your life. And I think as people of good conscience, as people of faith, people who want to make it right, I'm not suggesting that everyone has to have a John Brown revolution. You know who John Brown is, go Google him. But I am suggesting that there ought to be some sacrifice, because I don't think we get there without it. And I just want to say thank you all so much. You guys have been fantastic. This is the beginning. As I said to the last panel, I want to do this again. We have to. This is the beginning. And once again, it's just so critical that we have this conversation once again from people. I've had it with so many people who are on one side of this, kind of been the victims of a lot of this. And it's so important to me that we have conversations with people who have not been in that space and yet still understand this and understand what the heck is going on and how it impacts all of us. And so I just am grateful for your work. I'm grateful for your willingness to discuss this and have these conversations. And like you said, Clive, not just the willingness to talk about it, but to be about it. And that's what we have to do. The NFL's got to come up with policy, no statement policy. You know, what are they going to do differently?
Yeah, they need to look at the Rooney Rule, which no longer functions, basically. Mm-hmm. And but I think every Christian organization, every organization that's issued a statement needs to go back to the people who called them out before and say, because this stuff was said after Ferguson and all that other stuff.
Yeah. And
it took the riots and protests and stuff before the organizations even said something this time. They didn't say anything right after George Floyd was shot.
No, sir. No, sir.
That's wrong.
No. And that, I hate to say it, I don't support violence. Many people don't support violence. But unfortunately, it seems like violence is the only thing that gets people to listen in this way. And it's tragic, but it's true. Thank you all. I don't know if you guys had anything you want to say before we get out of here, but I'm going to go ahead and close out. We have gone a long time, but this has been very
Thank you.
Important.
Thanks, Ted.
I couldn't be more grateful.
To meet everybody.
God bless you guys. I will be in touch very soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you guys have seen it. You've heard it. We are now going to move into a whole nother sort of segment and section of our discussion. But my heart is full, and it's heavy because we have a lot of work to do in this country. And so I just thank them for discussing it. We will be doing this again, so please join us next week. A couple quick announcements before we transition. June 19th is Juneteenth, and that is the celebration of the emancipation of African Americans as they found out in places like Texas that they were actually free. And we celebrate this as sort of African American Independence Day. We're doing our production 1619 at the House of Hope for a live audience, WJYS, and live social media. I'll be hosting a faith-based virtual house church tomorrow that is around how do we rebuild our communities. Inbox me and I'll send you a link. You can join us as well. And then we'll be doing some more community cleanups and that kind of thing, which I think are important. But speaking of the arts, speaking of 1619, I want to welcome a good friend of mine, a dear sister of mine, Leslie Michele, who is a vocalist, an artist, and a fellow warrior, who is going to talk to us. We're going to lighten this up a little bit, because I know Leslie got a lot to say about justice too. But I'm going to take a break, and we're going to help people to be creative. I know, Leslie, I'm going to let you say something, because I know you're going to be like, I got to say something about this. I know you need to sit in that green room for an hour, listen to these people dropping these nuggets and not have something. So I want to give you a chance to say something. But I do want to talk for a moment about some individual development, because I think it is critical. And Leslie preaches and teaches this as well. It's important for us to be whole. If we're going to change the world, we got to be whole. And one of the things that I have seen is creativity really helps us to be whole. Leslie's an artist. She's a vocalist. I'm an artist, and we've worked together many times. And I wanted to talk today because we were on a prayer group this week, and we were talking about how do we sort of support and push out creativity? How do we nurture it? And Leslie is here to talk about that. So, Leslie, what's up?
Hello, everyone. Mr. Ted, good to be here. Thank you for having me. Honestly, after listening, I want to say I appreciate their hearts to be in the fight, to be warriors in this fight that we're in. But I also, when I think through the lens of creativity, it really spoke to me about the power we have to create. Honestly, this is what we've created. We individually and collectively have created the scenarios that we're in. And so it really is a testament of our power to create. We create systems, we've created governments, we create legislation, we are beings that create. And so I think, if anything, it's an inspiration to the power that we wield. Because we create, that means we have the power to do so. And so acknowledging that, what's happening around us, whether you had a hand in it or not, it's an aspect of creation, right? And so what can you create out of this? That's what I'm sitting with. That's literally what I've been taking time to meditate on, to pray about, to ponder, to vision. So what can I create? And how do I want to create? Who do I want to benefit from what I create? Those are really potent and powerful questions to be asking. And another thing that I've been sitting with is that when we create something, it's an expression of who we are. And so how they were talking about in that first panel, the book, The Grandmother's Hand, sitting with who we are. Who am I? How have I created? Has it been beneficial? And how can I create in this space now? And how can I grow in how I choose to create? Whether it's art, and I have this discussion as well quite a bit. So often we have a narrow idea of what creating is. Well, I'm not a painter, so I'm not really creative. I'm not a vocalist, or I don't play an instrument. But when you wake up in the morning and you choose coffee or tea, you have made a decision, a choice. That is a creative expression of what you want your day to look like, right? Whether you put honey or sugar, it's an act of choice, right? And so as we sit in this space, I encourage everyone to take a deep breath, because we have a lot more power than we have been, than we've been shared with, right? And I say that because I'm working on this. I'm working to understand this myself. What power do I wield? What power do I have, right? And the creative power that we have is significant, and it is potent. So if you're an artist, a visual artist, go forth. This is the time of expression. Music, they say that is the music. The music is the verbiage of the soul, right? And so if you have a song in your heart, don't worry about if you're not a singer or a musician. Put it out there, because we need for people to express what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. When you go to church, right? So I went to school for music and worship. And one of the things I'll never forget in a class was that the church's primary expression is the arts, right? Whether it be music, whether it be dance, the troupe, it's sacred, but it's the arts. So we're expressing our beliefs all the time. So
Yeah, I think she froze here, but I was going to hop in. So I don't know, maybe that was Divine or something. I don't know, but you hop in here. So hopefully she'll get back in here in a second. I was actually going to show some clips of Leslie performing, but I'm not going to do that because we've gone a long time today. We're going to be done in a second. But you guys can check her out. She's in a band called The Mini. Also, she is a music director and vocalist in our show 1619 on 1619musical.com. You can check it out. We've got her performing in our show Torn. So I was telling her I was going to show some clips, but I'm for the sake of time, we've been here for a long time, so we can go see you perform, and you can come see her perform with me and my other folks on June 19th. I will actually probably create an Eventbrite invitation to get folks there because it is really, really important. But Leslie is a vocalist and she writes songs, and actually we've written songs, right? So I oftentimes will, when it came to 1619 or Torn, Leslie was sort of my favorite person to go to with song ideas and say, hey, Leslie, I've got this song idea. What do you think? And always sort of helping to shape those things and connect them. And I can tell you, Leslie, that during this time of the pandemic and the time of the George Floyd case and everything, I have been creating a lot, right? So I wrote probably 2-3 songs this week. I just finished a book last month, another book, audiobook, and it's pouring out. And it's pouring out particularly to speak to what's going on. And so we were talking, the genesis of this conversation was, how do people create anything? Like, what do you do? How do you catch it and go forward? For those people who are not, like us, who are kind of, professional artists, which is what we are, how does the average person go, man, I got an idea for a drawing, a fashion design piece, a song, a play, a worship song, a article to help people think through this. How do you do that?
Cultivation, yes. One of the things that I've been learning and I have been wanting to, what I would love to share is this. The first thing is to acknowledge that you're a creative being. And that's somewhat difficult, right? And it's a process. So one, when those thoughts come, don't negate them, nurture them, write them down. But 2, create space for these thoughts to come. Now, granted, you may be in the car and it comes. Grab your voice memo, grab a pen. But on a consistent basis, if your desire is to create, I encourage time alone in silence, whether you take 10 minutes after you've done your prayers in the morning or at night, or if you're one that meditates, leave space for creative thoughts to flow through. And even, offer up something like, I am now sitting in this space of creativity. I welcome thoughts. I welcome what can come. And I found that often, even if something doesn't come right then, it helps me be receptive throughout the day to what may come, whether it be a poem or sometimes it's just a phrase that will come that will lead me somewhere else and I'll write it down. So always catch it. If you can, create space for it and respect it. Don't demean it. Don't say, oh, this is, it's always nourish it. Always respect it. Always appreciate it, because it's a muscle. Creativity it's a part of you. And if you're not used to engaging with yourself, you need to work that muscle. And as you keep doing it, it will become more natural. You'll be more inclined towards receiving and expressing your creativity. And lastly, I'll say, when in the nurturing process, push through to develop it. If there are stages to this creative thought, whether it's a song that you want to write, always, if as best you can, push through to the end and complete the song. Well, I don't play any instruments, but who do you know that does? There's Fiverr. There's all kinds of ways for you to fully engage in a creative thought these days. It's all around us. And lastly, in creativity is always about connection. So if there's a way that you can use your creativity to connect, like what I just said, you're reaching out to have your creation exposed. How awesome is that? Like the way we've worked together, we've built something, creating, because we also allowed for connection. You didn't sit in your home alone thinking, I have this great idea, but I'm going to keep it to myself. You reached out and you connected in creating.
Yeah, and I can tell you from personally, and I want us to do something a little bit more sort of expansive than this, right? I think I'd love to sort of, and I've got a few other friends that I've talked to about this. Brandy Booker, she may be watching, but she's a English professor and she's a creative person. And we were talking about doing a little workshop where we can just kind of help people. And so I really want to explore that as a possibility. I can tell you that there is massive insecurity that is exposed when you are creating. And I don't care who you are. I have not met an artist yet. And when I say artist, a writer, a fashion designer, a painter, a chef, right, who does not have some level of questioning of whether people are going to really enjoy what it is that they have shared or they're going to like it. I mean, I can tell you, I am my by far worst critic. I mean, I you guys have seen some of the stuff we've created. I've got 20 more things that people have not seen because I've been terrified to share. Like, oh my goodness, I'm trying to work it out. And so I love what you're saying about just pushing out there. And I think this creativity is therapy, particularly in a time where we are dealing with all of this angst and all of the stress and all of the challenges in this world right now. This creative space is cathartic. It is therapeutic. People have to tap into it now, maybe more than ever, to find peace and to find hope and to find a relief and to express, without, pain can turn into purpose, but without turning it into purpose, it's still just sitting there as pain. And I think that it's important that we do that. So Leslie, why don't you give us some final words here? And then we're going to expand this a little bit later. So, but why don't you give us a couple final words here about what we can say to our audience about tapping into their personal creative space?
Absolutely. So in alignment with the show in itself, we're talking about how to liberate ourselves and expressing who we are through creating, whether it be you're a math professor and you are sharing your math with your students, you're a teacher, you are an artist, a singer, a builder. You're liberating yourself when you create. And I would even dare say that when you were talking, Ted, about there's insecurity about creating, where did that come from? What systems are we living in where creating and expressing our creative selves is not supported in schools, and it's not appreciated the way that it used to be. So what does that mean in terms of how we are creating systems that don't allow people to create and express freely? Personally, I think that has a lot to do with the conversation that you just had with the other two panels. And it's inherently being said that creativity has a lens that it's being looked at through that doesn't speak well to our experience, because it's a natural thing to create. So if that's being hindered, that's a problem, because it's a necessity for people to be able to express. So my final words: liberate yourself. This is a time of liberation. Go forth, fearless. And if you have fear, wrestle through it and express yourselves. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much. Leslie, like I said, I was going to show clips. I'm going to have you sing. But y'all, we ain't going to have to do that today. You got to come see the show, okay? So if you come see the show, virtual show, June 19th, you can hear Leslie sing. You see me do some stuff as well. All of our wonderful, talented crew and cast that we have. Leslie, thank you so much for sharing your gifts with the world. I can tell you guys, Leslie is one of my favorite vocalists in the whole world. And I just love her sing 1,000 times. I work with her, and I enjoy it all the time. And I just know that once again, everyone, people look at her and they may look at me and they go, oh, well, you're creative type people. Everyone has the ability to create, and everyone is creating. And I think that it's important to tap into that. I think it brings life. particularly as we talked about justice issues and how our history in this country as people of color, African Americans, has really been that the arts have really saved us. And out of that pain has been born so much great art, which we could talk more about later. But anyway, God bless you. Thank you, Leslie, so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And we'll be in touch. Take care now.
Have a good one.
You too now. Thank you all so much for watching today. Remember, change starts with you. Once again, watch us next week at 6 p.m. We've got some more exciting guests for you. And every week we are here, so please join us. Thank you all. You guys have been fantastic. Hit us up in the comments section, and we will continue to create conversations that begin to change our lives and then change the world. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.